You're talking about 800,000 workers, and while I feel sorry for the individuals that have hardship cases, you're talking about 1/3% on our GDP. So it's not like it's a gigantic number.
Why hold this part of the government hostage for a political fight?
And you could ask that of both sides.
And they're all going to get their money. Many of the people that aren't being paid right now are in total agreement with us.
In terms of the workers who are coming to work and not getting paid, what would you say to them?
Listen, it's not fair to you, and we all get that, but this is so much bigger than any one person. It is a little bit of pain, but it's going to be for the future of our country.
They can't go to work, and so then they have the vacation, but they don't have to use their vacation days. And then they come back, and then they get their back pay, then they're, in some sense, they're better off. They took a cut out of our interview and made it look like I don't care about government workers not getting their paychecks, which, you know me, Maria, you know that's not true. Absolutely, government workers are going through a lot of pain right now. There are people that are having trouble making their rent payments. People are having trouble paying for their groceries. One of my staffers is driving an Uber, so of course there's a lot of pain.
There are some federal workers who are going to homeless shelters to get food.
Well, I know they are, and I don't really quite understand why. The 30 days of pay that some people will be out, there's no real reason why they shouldn't be able to get a loan against it.
You know who has more human pain? The parents of people who had children killed by an illegal immigrant that should have never been in the country. And the people that will be paid, but maybe a little bit later, those people, many of them are on my side.
SOTU is a pretty good acronym. I mean, it's not POTUS or FLOTUS, but it's good. The state of our union is, Earlier this month, Speaker Nancy Pelosi invited Trump to address the entire House and Senate on January the 29th. But then, the government shutdown dragged on, and on, and on, which led Pelosi to write Trump a second note, effectively disinviting him from giving his SOTU speech on the 29th. Quote, sadly, given the security concerns, and unless government reopens this week, I suggest we work together to determine another suitable date after government has reopened for this address, or for you to consider delivering your State of the Union address in writing to the Congress on January 29th, wrote Pelosi on January 16th. Dagger! Without Pelosi's invitation, Trump can't technically speak on the House floor because she's the boss of that particular piece of property. Now, all of this drums raises a simple-ish question. Why do we have a State of the Union address at all? Well, for starters, it's in the Constitution, sort of. Article 2, Section 3, Clause 2 reads, quote, he shall from time to time give to the Congress information on the state of the Union and recommend to their consideration such measures as he shall judge necessary and expedient. Think of the State of the Union speech as a sort of report card. It's a chance for the president to both look back on the stuff he thinks he's accomplished over the past year and outline what he wants to get done over the next year or years. It's a mixture of back-patting and goal setting, mixed in with a whole lot of standing ovations. Way back on January 8th, 1790, George Washington delivered the first State of the Union speech, except it wasn't called that just yet. Speaking in the Senate chamber of Federal Hall in New York City, Washington told the assembled legislators, quote, I embrace with great satisfaction the opportunity which now presents itself of congratulating you on the present favorable prospects of our public affairs. Pretty positive. Washington kept it brief. His entire speech fit on a single page, and that included his signature. It was the shortest State of the Union address ever, clocking in at just 1,089 words. John Adams followed in Washington's footsteps, delivering his annual address in person to the legislature. But then came Thomas Jefferson. Rather than deliver a speech to Congress, Jefferson just sent his annual address to Congress in written form. He was something of a trendsetter because for the next 100-ish years, every president followed Jefferson's lead, submitting their annual addresses in writing rather than actually delivering a speech to the Congress. Woodrow Wilson broke that tradition in 1913, becoming the first president in 112 years to actually give a State of the Union speech to Congress. Why? Well, Wilson thought an in-person speech was the best way to convince lawmakers of the need for tariff reform. And while Congress did show up for Wilson's speech, they weren't all that happy about it. Quote, if our Republican institutions are to continue, we must keep this government as much as possible away from personalities and near to principles, grumbled Maine's Asher Hines. Oh, Asher, if only you could see us now, you'd be so proud. In 1947, it became officially known as the State of the Union. The most famous State of the Union speech was probably Abraham Lincoln's in 1862. That came soon after he announced plans for the Emancipation Proclamation. Here's Lincoln, quote, in giving freedom to the slave, we assure freedom to the free, honorable alike in what we give and what we preserve. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. Other means may succeed. This could not fail. In more modern times, like, this century, George W. Bush used his 2002 speech to decry the now infamous axis of evil, Iraq, Iran, and North Korea. 6 years prior, Bill Clinton had famously declared that the, quote, era of big government is over. Then there was Gerald Ford's super depressing 1975 State of the Union, where he started the speech with this humdinger, quote, the State of the Union is not good. Now, he wasn't wrong. Richard Nixon had resigned in the midst of the Watergate scandal in August 1974, and the country was reeling. Now, in 2019, we appear to be on the brink of making some history in this version of the State of the Union address, too. Nancy Pelosi isn't budging on her demand that Trump either reschedule the speech until after the government reopens or simply submit it in writing. White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders told Fox News that, quote, if Nancy Pelosi chooses to go in that direction, the president will continue to speak to the American people, and I'm sure he'll do that on that evening as well. If he does, Trump won't be speaking on the floor of the House. He could deliver the so-to from the Senate, but there's just no way all 535 members of Congress could fit into that relatively small space. He could make a speech at the border to highlight his demands for $5 billion in border wall funding. He could even stay at home and give the address from the White House. Now, if Trump does any of those things, it will be historic, which is saying something, given that presidents have been delivering State of the Union speeches for the past 229 years. And that is the point. We make new Point episodes every Tuesday and Thursday. Watch them all.
Tomorrow, federal workers will receive their second paycheck with $0. Not really a paycheck. That means they can't pay bills, groceries, mortgages, car notes, vital medicines. Those realities are not resonating with many members of President Trump's inner circles. In fact, some of their comments seem really tone deaf.
Huge share of government workers were going to take vacation days, say between Christmas and New Year's. And then we have a shutdown. And so they can't go to work, and so then they have the vacation, but they don't have to use their vacation days. And then they come back, and then they get their back pay, then they're, in some sense, they're better off.
It is a little bit of pain, but it's going to be for the future of our country, and their children and their grandchildren and generations after them will thank them for their sacrifice right now.
Mr. Secretary, there are reports that there are some federal workers who are going to homeless shelters to get food.
Well, I know they are, and I don't really quite understand why. There's no real reason why they shouldn't be able to get a loan against it.
All right, well, they'll tell you they aren't. CNN political commentator S.E. Cupp and CNN political analyst Ryan Lizza, I want to get your take on this. What did you think about Lara Trump talking about the hardship that federal workers and contractors are going through as a little bit of pain, S.E.?
Well, in the sort of playbook of crisis comms responses, all the other options probably would have been better, right? If you're a multi-millionaire daughter-in-law of the president who doesn't need to work, one option is to not do press, is to not do television during a time that's painful for a lot of people. Another option is to go out and be honest and say, I cannot relate to the pain that a lot of people are feeling. I've been really fortunate, but I have compassion, I have sympathy. The other thing to do would be to say, very candidly, I understand the pain that's out there, and that's why Democrats need to come to the table. To do none of those and to sort of shrug off the pain is probably worse than doing nothing, worse than saying nothing. It seems like a real unforced error. I'm not really sure it's one the administration cares that much about because they keep putting people on TV to sort of drum that defense that it's not all that bad. So this might be exactly what they're looking for, but I think you're seeing the results of that in those poll numbers that have not been good for the president.
And Wilbur Ross, Ryan, saying he doesn't really understand because people should be able to get loans.
Yeah,
that's, I
well,
mean,
if
you're the
Wilbur
Congress. That's
Ross
not how it works unless you're
a billionaire. I'm sure it's not too hard for Wilbur Ross to get a loan. I mean, we've had previous shutdowns before, right? And so administrations have had to talk about this. But what we've never had are government officials, elected officials saying, this is great for them, right? Usually there's at least some acknowledgement that this is painful, right? That nobody wants this to happen, but there are policy implications and that's why this had to happen. I mean, to use the sort of cliche of the moment, it's like taking the hostages and then arguing that it's really better for the hostage once they're released. They'll really thank us later and they're being treated really well. And it's beyond tone deaf. I mean, it's just...
Yeah.
Go ahead, Essie.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Ryan. I just wanted to say, the other week I had South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem on my show, and I asked her about the very real effects of the shutdown in South Dakota, a state that went for Trump, that is one of the hardest hit. And she said very interestingly, look, I have farmers who are hurt by the shutdown, but they care more about getting their border wall. Now, I don't know if that's spin. I don't know if that's true. But there might be some idea, amongst the administration that calling this a sacrifice, that people will be sort of willing to take on the chin, might have some resonance somewhere. Again, I don't know if that's true in reality and practicality, but a number of them seem to be going with this theory so much that it seems almost premeditated.
While you were sleeping, the battle over the State of the Union took a dramatic turn. The president has conceded to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. He now says he will not deliver the State of the Union address until the government shutdown is over, after Nancy Pelosi had disinvited him. The president tweeting, quote, as the shutdown was going on, Nancy Pelosi asked me to give the State of the Union address. I agreed. She then changed her mind because of the shutdown, suggesting a later date. This is her prerogative. I will do the address when the shutdown is over. I am not looking for an alternative venue for the State of the Union address because there is no venue that can compete with the history, tradition, and importance of the House chamber. I look forward to giving a great State of the Union address in the near future.
It was a solid read.
Thank you.
All right, sources tell CNN the White House was caught off guard by Speaker Pelosi's move to revoke his invitation, and the president is increasingly mystified. His tactics have failed to turn the tables on Democrats. As this is going on, 800,000 federal workers, they will miss a second paycheck this week. Two measures to end the shutdown. They will go up for a vote in the Senate, but they are expected to fail today. Joining us now, Dana Bash, CNN chief political correspondent, Crystal Ball, president of the People's House Project, and Joshua Green, CNN political analyst and national correspondent for Bloomberg Businessweek. Dana, I want to know what changed. Yesterday, the president called in the White House press pool to say, I'm looking for an alternative location, to threaten Nancy Pelosi. And then last night, while we were all sleeping, for some reason, he caved.
Yes. I mean, what we're hearing from the White House, I heard from a source I know, or Abby Phillip heard as well, is that he is telling his advisors, and was last night, I don't want to do this anywhere else. I want to do it in the House chamber where it's supposed to happen. That might be part of the reason, but there are obviously so many factors here. First of all, they're seeing the poll numbers at the White House. They understand that this is not good for the president, for his approval rating generally, and of course his approval rating on this issue is so much lower than Nancy Pelosi's. That matters to the president. And also, it's been going on a long time. And there was a sense, listening to people like James Clyburn, who I know you're going to have on later this hour, talking about a potential new Democratic package in the House, that maybe that was an opening and maybe things can cool for, I don't know, a few hours while the Senate takes these show votes, that's what they are going to be later today. They're going to get that out of their system and hope that maybe compromise can start to happen.
Crystal, when I read this tweet from the president, and as we know, sometimes these things are ghostwritten by one of his staff, and this did not seem to follow his usual voice or syntax. However, the message stands. I mean, it's hard to imagine that somebody would have snuck in and grabbed Twitter away from him, wrestled Twitter away from him, and written it. And I just think it's notable. I think it's notable that he gave up the fight in the middle of the fight. I think that we haven't seen often. And the tone of this is her prerogative, he says. There's no nasty Nancy nickname that he has given to so many other people. I just think that we just need to pause for a moment and recognize there's some dynamic between Nancy Pelosi and President Trump that is different than the mold.
That is going to be fascinating to watch unfold. But yeah, I mean, what's notable here is he actually made a good and presidential decision. He's absolutely right that trying to do the State of the Union somewhere else or knocking on the door and being rejected or whatever was going to be a mess, because the reality is this president lost the shutdown fight before it ever happened, when he had everybody in the Oval Office and said, I will take credit for the shutdown. I would be proud to shut down the government for border security. In that moment, the fight was over, and it is not salvageable for him. The other thing I would say here is welcome to divided government. For the first time, Democrats can't just go up and complain and whine. They actually have some power. And I think the president, for the first time, is wrapping his head around exactly what that means.
Can I just add one quick thing? Not just power, but a powerful person who wields the power in a very direct and specific way. And I think that's why my understanding in talking to people around the president for some time is that that's why Nancy Pelosi doesn't so far have a nickname. He respects money and he respects power and being able to wield power. And on this, I mean, she might have the first, but the second is really what's getting her his attention.
When if you look at this fight over the State of the Union address, that is a fight that Nancy Pelosi herself orchestrated and then won. I mean, what is that if not a clear display of power? She sent a note to Trump saying, hey, maybe you want to rethink this. Trump said, no, I'm going to come. And she slapped it down and said, no, you're not going to come. You know, and forced him to back down. I mean, that's a real display of power that I think you can understand and expect.
You know, Crystal brought up the point where the president owned the shutdown. That may have been a high point for him in this battle because, and Josh, you've written about this, there are startling new economic numbers. There's startling security realities for the 800,000 federal workers out there. But Kevin Hassett, you know, the White House chief economist, told Poppy Harlow we could see 0% growth this quarter. At Bloomberg Business Week, this is the kind of stuff you care about deeply.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote in the cover story this week, went around and polled economists. Hassett came out, said we could zero out growth. And it is clear if this shutdown goes on, there could be, and eventually there will be a recession. So it has to rectify itself. The problem is there are two things different about this shutdown than past ones. Number one, it's the first one engineered by the president himself. Right. That actually gives him a lot of power to mitigate the damage of people, right? He sent all these IRS workers back to work so that the middle class doesn't revolt when they don't get their tax refunds. He's kept TSA workers on the job to the extent that he can. But what that means is the government has stayed shut and the economic damage has continued to compound to a really scary point. If this thing doesn't get settled in the next few weeks, there's going to be real fallout that's going to be felt throughout the economy.
And if I could just add on to that, I mean, there's reporting that Mick Mulvaney, the acting chief of staff, whatever that means, is going around trying to assess, you know, what programs are going to be impacted here.
If it goes on for months,
if it
by
goes
the way,
on through
the deadline is through April, yeah.
And the reality is, look, you have TSA workers, you have correctional officers, you have Border Patrol agents, you have people who cannot go that long without a paycheck. They're going to up and get another job. Already the head of the flight attendants union is calling for a general strike. I mean, there is no way this lasts till April because it's already a crisis. It will be absolute catastrophe. Airports shut down, and potentially really the end of this presidency. More dangerous to him than the Mueller probe or anything else is how this shutdown is resolved at this point.
So what's your reporting, Dana, on what happens today? Because between the tweet, between the state, now not having to worry about the window dressing of the State of the Union, it feels like maybe there's a detente. Yeah, there's something
cracks
happening.
In that glacier. Yeah, it could be. In traditional times, which we are not in right now, but in traditional times, when there is a standoff, the show votes, and I keep calling them that because that's what they are today in the U.S. Senate, are the icebreakers. They let members get off steam. They let them get on the record, even more importantly, for their supporters and for their constituents of where they really are. In this case, Republicans are going to be supportive of the president's plan. Democrats are going to be supportive of border security, reopening the government, no wall. Then they can roll up their sleeves and get down to business. And that might be the case today because of the fact that while the Senate is doing their thing, the House is not going to have any more votes this week. But they do have a proposal in the works to try to reignite these compromise talks. A lot more money than they have proposed on border security. Nothing for the wall, but things that the president does like, which the hope is will at least start the conversation again, which hasn't happened for weeks.
Yeah.
Josh, if I can change the subject wildly for a second here. I seem to remember that the first part of your book, like the opening scene, is Kellyanne Conway leaking, correct?
It actually is. The opening anecdote, Devil's Bargain, is Kellyanne Conway leaking, which has suddenly come back into the news.
Okay, it's come back into the news because Cliff Sims, who has worked in the White House, left the White House, has a book coming out next week called Team of Vipers, and dribs and drabs are being released over time. And he really goes after Kellyanne Conway, calls her a leaker, but among other things, depicts her as literally a cartoon villain in the White House. This is what he says. She was a cartoon villain. Brought to life. Her agenda, which was her survival over all others, including the president, became more and more transparent. She seemed to be perennially cloaked in an invisible fur coat, casting an all-knowing smile as if she collected 98 Dalmatians with only 3 more to go. It's vivid imagery. It's incredibly harsh. But what's the point? Is there a bigger picture here other than just the normal backstabbing we see in a White House staff?
Well, what was interesting to me is that, this White House, more than any in my lifetime, is notorious for leaking. There are all sorts of people who leak. You've had people pushed out of the administration, people like Steve Bannon, for leaking. Kellyanne Conway so far has not been. I mean, what's so shocking about this book and this Vanity Fair excerpt is Cliff Sims brings the receipts. He describes a scene where he's on her laptop watching her text in real time and leak against Trump and Bannon and Kushner and various members of the administration. So it presents a very vivid firsthand portrait of how the sausage is made, in Washington, in this White House, in a way that we haven't seen before on the record from White House sources.
And so the question is, how has she survived for so long? She has survived. She's a survivor, and I think that he gets to the heart of it when he says her agenda, which was her survival over all others, including the president. So she's very canny, as we know. But why does the president allow leaks from her?
They have a very, very strong relationship. Now, that has not stopped other people from getting the boot who have strong relationships with the president, but theirs is special and different for a lot of reasons. Just the most obvious is that she is the ultimate fighter. She goes out and she will fight with you and with me and all of us for and about the president of the United States on television. We can underscore enough. He is a cable watcher. He is all about what is said on his behalf on television, and she does it from his perspective better than anybody.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. I'm Anne-Marie Green. President Trump says he is postponing the State of the Union address until the partial government shutdown ends. This after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi wrote a letter to the president withdrawing her invitation for him to give the address on the House floor. The president slammed the House Speaker on Twitter last night, calling the move her prerogative. He then went on to say there is no venue that can compete with the history, tradition, and importance of the House chamber. I look forward to giving a great State of the Union address in the near future. Speaker Pelosi responded, Mr. President, I hope by saying near future, you mean you will support the House passed package to end the shutdown. She's referring to one of 2 competing measures the Senate will vote on today, 34 days after the shutdown began. A Republican bill would give the president his $5.7 billion in border wall funding, while a Democratic proposal would reopen the government through February 8th, but with no wall money. Both bills are likely to fail. Nancy Cordes joins us now from Capitol Hill alongside Major Garrett, who is at the White House. So, Nancy, I'm going to start with you. Can you give us a little bit of context here? Just, does there have to be a State of the Union address? And has a president ever been refused access to the House chamber?
There doesn't have to be an address in person, televised, as there has been for decades. The president is simply required by the Constitution to inform the Congress from time to time about the state of the union. In this case, he really doesn't have the option of delivering that State of the Union right now, because in order for any president to deliver an address to a joint session of Congress, the House and Senate have to pass a resolution that sets out the date and the time. And in this case, the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, surprised a lot of people, including some members of her own party, when she basically put her foot down yesterday in that letter to the president and said, no, the House will not be voting on that resolution until the government is reopened. And so initially the president was saying that he might deliver the speech in another location, but in a somewhat conciliatory note this morning, he said that in fact he will wait until after the government is open. So clearly this is a fight that he and the White House decided they didn't want to have.
Yeah, indeed. So, Major, we're not going to hear the State of the Union address, but we did hear earlier this week that the White House had been working on two different scripts, two different speeches, I guess. One that would have been delivered in the House chamber, and then maybe another one that could have been delivered at a political rally. Do you think there's a likelihood that though we won't hear the State of the Union address, we may hear from the president addressing the nation in some other way?
Well, there's going to be a State of the Union address. It's just not going to be January 29th,
Right.
the original scheduled date. The president has said, once this is resolved, I'll come to the House chamber, you'll welcome me, and we'll go through the process. It's just not going to happen on the 29th. So, the president last night did something that I think sends a couple of interesting signals. One, he respected the institutional prerogative of the House. Why does that matter? Because institutional prerogatives are the way our government functions, when it functions best. Does this mean the shutdown is closer to ending? I'm not going to predict that, but this is a significant concession by the White House and a recognition that institutional powers and institutional prerogatives matter. And if you're going to take that approach, which the White House was not taking until last night on this particular matter, it doesn't require a great leap to say the institutional prerogatives and other matters also are important to recognize as well. And what are those institutional prerogatives in terms of resolving this partial government shutdown? Well, that the House Democratic majority has within its power the ability to bring legislation to the floor or not. And that institutional power has to be recognized. Recognizing one might mean this White House is getting closer to recognizing the other and finding a way to resolve the government shutdown. So I know everyone is very fascinated about this sort of very personal drama or mini drama between the Speaker of the House and the President over the State of the Union. I think what happened last night is much more important in the larger story of where this shutdown process is going. Because by recognizing the institutional clout of the House last night and saying so publicly, and as Nancy said, in a conciliatory way, it just leads me to believe that this White House is preparing itself possibly for other conciliatory maneuvers to come.
And we talked a little bit about this yesterday, Major, with you. This is going to be sort of awkward, but sort of seeing the silver lining in some movements, and part of that has to do with the two bills that are going to be reviewed today in the Senate. Nancy, the expectation is both of them are going to fail. Yesterday, when I was talking to Major about this, he kind of said, well, that's actually a good sign because at least they're talking. I'm paraphrasing you, Major. Nancy, I'm going to get your take on this. Is this productive, even though we know most likely both of these bills are going to fail?
Sure. I mean, votes are better than no votes, right? It's probably cold comfort for a lot of federal workers knowing that these bills are going to fail, but at least Congress is coming back and they're actually going to try to do something. Now, even though these bills are going to fail today, that doesn't mean that they have no utility. What you've got are two bills, a Republican bill and a Democratic bill. The Republican bill is basically a reflection of what the latest White House proposal is, which is to give the president the $5.7 billion in border wall funding he wants, but as what they see as a concession to Democrats, allow temporary legal protections for the DACA population, people who came to this country illegally as children, some of them at least, for 3 years. That bill is going to fail because Democrats say, 3 years is not enough. It still leaves all these young people in limbo. And B, that it really isn't much of a departure from the president's opening salvo, and they don't want to give any wall funding, let alone $5.7 billion. So that bill is not going to get the votes it needs. Then you've got a Democratic bill that doesn't give the president any wall funding, but does reopen the government for a couple of weeks to allow more time for negotiations, and at least allows these federal workers who are set to miss a second paycheck tomorrow to get paid in the meantime. That bill is going to fail because it probably won't get much Republican support. The one good thing that will come out of this, Anne-Marie, since you're looking for silver linings, is the fact that it will send a message to the president that what he wants right now does not have the votes to pass. And so he does perhaps need to move more towards the Democratic position. It obviously also sends a message to Democrats that they're not going to get exactly what they want. And they appear to already have gotten that message because there is talk in the House of another proposal, a Democratic proposal that would give the president billions of dollars in border wall security funding, but not for, I should have said border security funding, not for a wall. That's the one thing that would not be in it. They'd give money for things like drones and personnel to beef up security at the border. And the question is, if they put that on the table, would the president, and Major certainly knows more about this than I do, would the president come off of his longstanding position that it's either the wall or nothing?
Would the president, Major? I know you can't get into his head, but he seemed at times to be willing to pivot towards border security versus just the wall.
Right. So, to pick up on Nancy's excellent description and reporting on what was happening yesterday, James Clyburn, number 3 House Democrat from South Carolina, said $5.7 billion border security. He said, I like to call it for a smart wall. Okay, a smart wall. That's a rhetorical way of trying to catch the president's ear. And I've been in communication via text this morning with senior administration officials who have not ruled that out categorically. They haven't embraced it, but they haven't ruled it out categorically. Long time ago, remember when the Oval Office, when Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer were there with the president, when the president said, I'm going to own the shutdown, I'll take the mantle? When I was standing there, I said to the president, is this going to come down to redefining what border security means? Meaning finding some mutually agreeable set of words that wrap around funding where everyone can say they're for something and define it later. Chuck Schumer, sitting right next to me in the Oval Office, said, yes, that's where this is going to land. And the president sort of didn't engage on that. It feels to me as if we're moving in that direction. Money is on the table. People agree about the money. There are limits on what it can be and can't be, but you can call it whatever you want to call it. Smart wall, 21st century wall, border security wall. Will it meet the president's definition? I don't know. But it hasn't been ruled out this morning here at the White House, which tells me there is at least some way after these votes that conversations can continue and move at least in a semi-productive direction.
You would think that would be sort of the first stop on getting to some sort of agreement, is defining exactly what you want the American public to pay for. Clearly, a smart wall might have a different price tag than a concrete wall or slats or whatever. But I digress, Major. I want to ask you about another major story. You know, Major, I'm sitting at this desk for hours on end, and I think that I've basically been here for most of the day's news. And then I leave, and 5 minutes later, all kinds of things happen. And in this
Welcome
case,
to my life. Yes.
Oh my goodness. So in this case, the president's former attorney, Michael Cohen, announced that he was now going to be postponing his testimony in front of Congress. I don't know about you, but I know a lot of people were really waiting to hear his version of the story. Found it interesting that he used the word postponing, but he's blaming threats by the president and the president's current attorney, Rudy Giuliani, for that decision. Here's what his attorney, Lanny Davis, had to say about the issue a little bit earlier this morning. Let's all listen.
The House of Representatives now has an obligation. A resolution of censure when the President of the United States indisputably intimidates and obstructs justice to prevent a witness from testifying is in order. So is a federal criminal investigation of Rudy Giuliani for witness tampering, calling out a man's father-in-law and wife in order to intimidate the witness is not fair game.
Okay, so let's remind people of what he's actually talking about, because he's talking about interviews that the president and Rudy Giuliani have done over the past couple of weeks, where suddenly Michael Cohen's father-in-law is the topic of conversation.
Right. Inferences made, implications laid out there that there might be something sketchy about his personal finances or something else, and that you should be looking into the father-in-law, and also vague references to possible culpability, very vague. We don't know what it means about Michael Cohen's wife. And top Democrats on the relevant committees yesterday, in writing, called this classic mob tactics, witness intimidation. That's a very big deal. I have no clue. I defer to Nancy entirely on this as to whether or not the House of Representatives would even consider a formal censuring motion of the president on this matter. But to have the top Democrats, the Oversight and Judiciary Committee, say on the record in writing the president has engaged, and one of his attorneys, Rudy Giuliani, has engaged in mob-like intimidation tactics is very serious stuff. And it is, again, a reflection of the institutional powers a Democratic House majority now possess, which this White House is over time having to get itself used to, sometimes in very uncomfortable ways.
Yeah, Nancy, I can hear you agreeing.
Right. I mean, the fact that Democrats now control the House means that, guess what? They can open an investigation today, if they want, into this allegation of presidential witness tampering, intimidation. And that itself can be another thorn in the president's side. So this is certainly not something that Democrats are going to let go. Of course, they do want to hear from Michael Cohen. They're not going to forget about him. And they will continue to try to push to make that testimony happen. But now they've got another avenue to explore, just as they set out on a whole raft of investigations into security clearances at the White House and the process used to come up with census questions and hurricane relief in Puerto Rico will now add another possibility to the plate. Did the president and one of his top attorneys intimidate a key witness? Certainly that's fertile ground for this new Democratic majority.
Yeah, right. Hey, Major and Nancy, before I let you go, Major, I talked about the word postpone. I don't know if I'm making too much out of it, if it's significant that he said postpone versus I'm not going to do it. We know he can't postpone it for very long because he's going to jail.
Well, right, and he also could be subpoenaed, and there are lots of means by which this could happen, and he clearly wants to say something. There is a timeline involved. Subpoena powers are relevant to an investigation like this. If he doesn't want to be a cooperative witness, he can be subpoenaed. The subpoena powers of Congress are important, hard to ignore. So this is, I think, properly described as postponed. And the other thing it illustrates is, for the first 2 years of the Trump administration, lots of wild things were said by the president on Twitter. That's not a breaking news item. But the House Republican majority in the House and the Senate Republican majority did not oftentimes react, or react in a strenuous way. The House Democratic majority is making it abundantly clear there is no such thing as simply loose talk on Twitter or in interviews by this president. Words matter, and it's going to use its powers if it believes those words are used in a threatening or injurious way, and make the White House explain itself in ways the previous House Republican majority almost never did.
Indeed. Nancy and Major, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Anne-Marie.
All right, we want to thank Emily Jane Fox for coming in, keeping us posted on Michael Cohen news. Thank you, Emily. Now to this. In a late-night Twitter exchange, President Trump backed down to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on the State of the Union this Tuesday, acknowledging that she controls the real estate on Capitol Hill. In tweets sent after 11 p.m. in Washington, the president wrote, as the shutdown was going on, Nancy Pelosi asked me to give the State of the Union address. I agreed. She then changed her mind because of the shutdown, suggesting a later date. This is her prerogative. I will do the address when the shutdown is over. I'm not looking for an alternative venue for the address because there is no venue that can compete with the history, tradition, and importance of the House chamber. I look forward to giving a great State of the Union address in the near future. Shortly before midnight, the Speaker responded, Mr. President, I hope by saying near future, you mean you will support the House-passed package to end the shutdown that the Senate will vote on tomorrow. Please accept this proposal so we can reopen government, repay our federal workers, and then negotiate our differences. Willie, this is delicious for Democrats who wanted Nancy Pelosi to step up and push back at this president. And in what may be somewhat of a symbolic battle, it seems like for the first time in his life, he got the answer no, and he had to live with it.
Well, Speaker Pelosi has held the line throughout this shutdown, and ironically, she is the one person, it seems, that President Trump actually respects in Washington. The way he talks about her, the way he addresses her, the way he now responds to her demands and requests is unlike other people that we've seen throughout Washington and during his presidency. And Jake Sherman, the question now is, okay, we're back from the brink a little bit of this State of the Union address, but what happens from here? We've got the 2 votes today in the Senate, one a Republican bill, one a Democrat bill, neither expected to get the 60 votes it needs. But does that get people a little bit closer to something to end the shutdown here?
Yes and no. I mean, there's 2 distinct dynamics that are happening at the same time. Number one, there is this thaw in which Nancy Pelosi is putting border wall money on the table and is saying she's looking to get some sort of compromise in the coming weeks. She is now saying she will give upwards of $5 billion. Her allies and aides are telling us this, but no wall money. She doesn't want any money for the wall, but she is willing to talk about border security. Then you have this incredibly bizarre standoff, which, by the way, Republicans thought yesterday that they were winning. They were daring Nancy Pelosi to disinvite formally the president from giving the State of the Union. Nancy Pelosi did it basically without blinking an eye, and the president backed down. That's an important dynamic because it does reestablish Pelosi as it establishes her primacy on Capitol Hill, which is incredibly important in this tit for tat with the president. Now, listen, in the next couple days, 2 things need to happen. Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell need to get engaged with each other. They are the only 2 people at this point, along with Chuck Schumer, who could get a deal. And the deal that we know, we kind of understand what the contours of this deal are. They are going to be a big border security package, several $1 billion, maybe some modest changes to immigration policy, and maybe some promise that they will look at further ways to secure the border. The president, according to Pelosi, who again controls the House, the president is getting used to this fact, but controls the House. She's not getting any money. He's not getting any money for the wall. She's not giving it, and those dynamics are not going to change.
So another new poll shows that the shutdown is crashing President Trump's approval rating. The Associated Press, an ORC poll, puts the president's job approval at just 34%, down 8 points from December. Meanwhile, disapproval of his performance has climbed up to 65%, up 9 points from just before the shutdown began. His rating is near its lowest in 2 years, dropping significantly among independents. This after a CBS News poll found his approval rating has fallen to 36%. Asked in a separate question if a border wall is worth the government shutdown, 71% said no. Still, the Trump administration is reportedly asking agency leaders for a list of programs that would be affected if the shutdown continues for the next several weeks. A senior official with the Office of Management and Budget tells NBC News, quote, prudent management means planning and preparing for events without known end dates. As OMB continues to manage this partial lapse in appropriations, unfunded agencies are being asked to continue to share with OMB an ongoing list of programs that could be impacted within the coming weeks. According to the Washington Post, acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney has pressed agency leaders for a list of high-impact programs that would be jeopardized if the shutdown continues into March and April. People familiar with the directive told the Post Mulvaney wants the list no later than Friday, and it's the firmest evidence to date that the White House is preparing for a lengthy funding lapse that could have snowballing consequences for the economy and government services. Meanwhile, Chief White House economist Kevin Hassett said, get this, that there could be zero growth in the first quarter if the shutdown continues that long. Zero.
Could we get zero growth? I just want to nail this down.
Yes,
for the,
we could.
We could. Okay.
We could, yes.
All right.
If it
Wow.
extended for the whole quarter, and given the fact that the first quarter tends to be low because of residual seasonality, then you could end up with a number very close to zero in the first quarter.
In terms of the workers who are coming to work and not getting paid, what would you say to them?
Listen, it's not fair to you, and we all get that, but this is so much bigger than any one person. It is a little bit of pain, but it's going to be for the future of our country.
Laura Trump saying it's a little bit of pain. She says she was misunderstood. It's not a little bit of pain, though. It's a lot of pain, a lot of human suffering across the country, millions of American people. Michael Steele, look at these poll numbers and tell me how Republicans wouldn't at this point be urging Mitch McConnell to figure something out, because this cannot go on till March and April, and this White House is preparing for it to go on in March and April. Are Republicans going to stay with this?
I think that what you're seeing today with these votes in the Senate is we're not watching the ice break, but we're hearing it creak. This is the beginning of the end of this shutdown. We're going to see an effort after we see that the president's plan can't pass and the Democrats' plan can't pass. You're going to see probably Senator McConnell and Speaker Pelosi working together to find the compromise language that gets the government open again. Not today, not tomorrow, but in the next week or two. And this is an easy thing. The wall is a MacGuffin. The wall is not a real policy. There are places on the border where a physical barrier makes sense. There are places on the border where it doesn't. You can improve and increase border security without building a Game of Thrones style wall across the southern border of the United States. And that's exactly what we're going to do.
Well, hold on, Willie, sorry, just Michael, follow up. Can Democrats give him some sort of symbolic, safe-facing amount of money for the stupid wall? And then get a lot more in terms of border security and other immigration issues that are important to them? Is there any movement here that's possible with Mitch McConnell?
Sure. I think that this is going to end with a typical Washington fudge where Democrats will agree to additional money for border security, and they will say there's no wall, we're not giving money for a wall, they're not going to build a wall. The president will say, look at all this money I got to build a wall to improve border security, and everyone lives to fight another day.
This is pretty extraordinary here, Mika. 5 former Homeland Security secretaries, including President Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, his chief of staff as of a couple of weeks ago, are calling on the president and Congress to end the shutdown. NBC News has obtained a copy of the letter. It states that one of the unfortunate consequences of the shutdown has been the need for some Homeland Security employees to seek unemployment or to find a new job. The letter reads in part, We write to you today with a simple message. Fund the critical mission of DHS. Homeland Security is national security. DHS has a vital mission to secure the nation from the many threats we face. Also, groups representing aviation professionals are sounding the alarm about the growing risks to public safety. Yesterday, the unions representing air traffic controllers, pilots, and flight attendants released this joint statement. Quote, in our risk-averse industry, we cannot even calculate the level of risk currently at play, nor predict the point at which the entire system will break. It is unprecedented. Mike Barnacle, go back to John Kelly for a second. As I said, he was President Trump's chief of staff for almost 2 years. As of a couple weeks ago, as the chief of staff, he has now signed on to a letter saying, end the shutdown.
Yeah, well, he knows how stupid the shutdown is. Yeah. And he knows how really relatively easy it would be to end the shutdown if both sides were not so dug in and the politics of this were not so polarized. Michael Steele, who worked for John Boehner, I mean, John Boehner had a very good relationship with former Chief of Staff Bill Daley in the Obama White House. They spoke regularly. They almost got a big budget deal done. Didn't happen, but they were speaking to each other. Now it seems both sides are so frozen in movement, in their lack of movement, that we have the acting Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, talking about what to do to prepare for an extended shutdown into March or April. Susan, I don't know about you, but I mean, watching this play out is just a stunning, stunning portrait of complete ignorance on both sides of what the reality of this shutdown is doing, not just to the 800,000 people not getting a check for the second time, but to the country itself.
You know, it's cold comfort to people across the country, especially the federal workers affected by this, that they see this tit for tat debate going on in Washington. But I think that is the force that is going to make this get resolved. You know, you think about who broke yesterday with the president. Cory Gardner told the Denver Post he would vote for the Democratic bill coming up in the Senate today. Cory Gardner up for re-election in Colorado next year. Just finished a term as chairman of the Senate campaign committee arm for the GOP. That's a message that senators and congressmen on the Republican side as well as the Democratic side are hearing from people, from their constituents, that this needs to stop, and not in March or April. That would be extraordinary for this to extend into then.
Yeah.
All right, so Jake, looking forward to whether or not getting Mitch McConnell to move on this, and Mitch McConnell perhaps to appeal to the president that this isn't working, that the only people who might be appealed to here is that hardcore base, that most of America doesn't want this wall, but you've got human suffering here and danger to the country. Isn't this upon Mitch McConnell at this point to make the president understand his fantasy has to end?
Yeah, well, it is, because he's going to have a member management problem, and Mitch McConnell understands that. Right now, the dam, and I agree with Mike Steele on this, the dam has not broken, but it is showing signs of cracks. It is showing signs of creaking, I guess is the word I'm looking for. But I don't know when that moment will come. But when it does come, I do believe, having covered McConnell for this long, and I assume Mike agrees here, I do believe that when he goes to the president with that information, the president will have to listen to him, because once McConnell decides to move, he will be able to override a veto at some point in the coming days or weeks. I don't know when that point is. It's probably in the next 2 or 3 weeks. When he decides to move, everyone will follow him. It's not like the House of Representatives. All of McConnell's Senate Republican colleagues follow him and listen to him. So when he decides to move, it will be a sign for the president that it's time to end this thing, and it's time to end it with what Mike said is a fudge, some sort of deal that allows both sides to declare victory and move on, because the president's agenda, to the extent he has one, is completely stalled at the moment. Everything is focused on this immigration fight.
All right, senior writer at Politico, co-author of The Playbook, now in NBC News and MSNBC political contributor Jake Sherman. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And still ahead on Morning Joe, the FBI Agents Association says the shutdown is hurting national security. We're going to talk to the group's president, who represents 14,000 active and former agents. Also ahead.
We want to get right to that breaking news out of Washington. A late-night tweet, President Trump has backed down, agreeing to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's call to postpone the State of the Union until the government shutdown ends.
And the shutdown is now entering day 34, and tomorrow hundreds of thousands of federal workers will miss a second paycheck.
And they're letting their feelings be known about that. Protesting on Capitol Hill, senior congressional correspondent Mary Bruce has the latest. And Mary, there's still no end in sight.
Yeah, Robin, 5 weeks into this shutdown, and the two sides are not negotiating. There is no compromise deal on the table. But now this morning, the two sides do agree on one thing. Unless they can agree to reopen the government, the State of the Union as planned is off. Overnight, a sharp reversal from President Trump, giving in to Speaker Pelosi and agreeing to delay his State of the Union, saying it is the Speaker's prerogative and he will do the address when the shutdown is over, tweeting there is no venue that can compete with the history, tradition, and importance of the House chamber. Trump changing his tune just hours after he tried to call Speaker Pelosi's bluff and refused to put off the speech.
I think that's a great blotch on the incredible country that we all love. It's a great, great, horrible mark.
But Pelosi said the president was not welcome until the shutdown is over. Day 34, and 800,000 federal workers are now poised to miss their second paycheck.
We want to work. We need a paycheck.
Hundreds of fed-up furloughed workers clogging the halls of the Capitol.
It is rough. All I want to do is just go back to work so I can pay my bills.
Protesters arrested outside the office of Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell. Meanwhile, the president's daughter-in-law offered this consolation in an interview with Bold TV to furloughed workers struggling to make ends meet.
It is a little bit of pain, but it's going to be for the future of our country, and their children and their grandchildren and generations after them will thank them for their sacrifice right now.
Now, adding to the calls to end this shutdown, 5 former Homeland Security secretaries, including the president's former chief of staff, John Kelly. In a letter, they are urging President Trump and members of Congress to fund the department, saying that these employees help secure the nation and shouldn't have to rely on charity, saying, quote, "This is unconscionable."
It truly is. And we know the Senate is set to vote on dueling bills today.
Yeah, Robin, later this afternoon, they will bring up these 2 competing plans. One is the president's proposed compromise that would fund his border wall. The other one is the Democrats' plan to temporarily reopen the government that does not fund the president's wall. But, Robin, both plans are expected to fail.
All right, Mary, thank you.